In this lecture, we're going to look at the Qur'an, how it was revealed, its impact on the Muslim world, a bit about its contents, and why it's so important within the place of Islam. Arguably, Muslims revere the Qur'an more than Christians do the Bible or Jews the Torah. It's not because it's not an issue of religious piety or who is more devout in their own religion, but it's what the Qur'an is within Islamic theology. One could argue that they almost esteem it to the level that Christians do Jesus. After we go through this lesson, you'll have a better understanding of the place of respect and authority that the Qur'an holds in Islam and the reasons that Muslims have even gone up to rioting in response to desecrations of the book throughout the last decade. Like we did in the last lecture, let's look at a current event. In 2005, Newsweek magazine claimed that a guard at Guantanamo Bay flushed a Qur'an down the toilet. This was at a period when, during the War on Terror, the uses of force against enemy combatants and enhanced interrogation techniques were starting to become really controversial. Less than a week later, protesters in Afghanistan were chanting death threats against the U.S. and burning American flags. The protests left 15 dead and 100 injured. The story of a Qur'an being flushed down the toilet, as reported in Newsweek, later turned out to be false, but similar protests for supposed desecrations have been happening for years. One such episode was in Afghanistan against U.S. soldiers who accidentally burned hundreds of Qur'ans in February 2012 as part of destroying the personal effects of Afghani prisoners. So the question is, why do desecrations of the Qur'an, or even supposed desecrations, prompt such a strong backlash? Well, partly because the Qur'an's place in Islam, like I said before, Muslims revere it more than Christians do the Bible or Jews the Torah, and the importance of the Qur'an to Muslims is a category all of its own. Christians believe that God communicated through humans to share his message with humanity. However, Muslims believe that the Qur'an is the literal word of God that existed in its entirety for all eternity. For this reason, most Muslim scholars claim that a Qur'an can't be translated from Arabic into another language, the way that Hebrew and Greek manuscripts have been compiled and collected and produced the Old Testament and the New Testament. As the Qur'an is the perfect revelation of God, a translated Qur'an isn't a Qur'an at all, but merely an interpretation. In Turkish, for example, you'll see books of translated Qur'ans into Turkish. It doesn't say the Qur'an on the cover, it says the meaning of the Qur'an, stating that this isn't the Qur'an itself because it's not in Arabic, but it can convey the meaning as much as possible into another language. So where did the Qur'an come from? Muslims claim that the Qur'an came down to humans through a series of revelations that the angel Gabriel gave to Muhammad starting in 610 at a cave near Mecca. His followers memorized these fragments, and they were later compiled into a book a few decades later by the third Umayyad Caliph, Uthman. They say that although Muhammad was illiterate, his ability to narrate such a work is proof of its divine origin. The place of memorizing the Qur'an still occupies a respected position within Islam today. There's an honorary term, hafiz, which means someone who has memorized the Qur'an in its entirety. And this is attested throughout prominent rulers, travelers, and other people that to show an example of their piety, they would have it entirely memorized. One example of a figure is the famous medieval traveler, Ibn Battuta, who lived in the 13th century. He was from North Africa, but for 30 years he traveled to Mecca and Medina, China, India, Southeast Asia, and everywhere in between. And he said that on long days on camelback in his caravan, he would spend a few hours reciting the Qur'an, which took a few, or if he had to speed up, he could do it in approximately 2. Okay, so what is the organization of the Qur'an? Its organization comes like this. It's divided into surahs, which are much like books of the Bible. It's a bit confusing of a book to read for the uninitiated, as the surahs are arranged from the longest to shortest books, not by chronology. And the verses are broadly separated into 2 groups. the Meccan surahs and the Medina surahs. The Meccan surahs were written, as the title suggests, before the military growth of Islam, when Muhammad was in Mecca, when Muslims were not in a position of power and were under religious pressure to accommodate different religious beliefs. It's these verses where you often find discussion of love and tolerance of other religions and respect of Christians and Jews, which are termed Ili Kitab, the people of the book. The later written Medina surahs are when Muhammad and his followers were in Medina and were able to gain some political power. Here, much less tolerance and accommodation is shown to other religions. There you can see there is part of the 96th surah of the Qur'an, written below, also showing the important legacy of calligraphy within productions of the Qur'an. So there's a lot of superstition that surrounds the Qur'an in its history, much like the Bible has done for Christians. I'll just talk about one really interesting episode. This comes from the Habsburg diplomat to the Ottoman Empire, Uyghur de Busbek, who was an ambassador in the 1500s during the reign of Sultan Suleiman, the most powerful sultan in Ottoman history. European diplomats who traveled to Turkey, and this comes from his account, his personal memoirs. European diplomats who traveled to Turkey reported that while lodging at travelers' inns, they noticed a strange sight. The bricks and stones that made up the walls had hundreds of pieces of paper stuck in the cracks. Uyghur Gilson de Busbek asked an innkeeper about these curious scraps of paper and the paradoxically powerful effect they had on tenants, since nearly all of them were illiterate. Why did they respect these scraps and pieces of paper so much? The innkeeper reported that the tenants were afraid of these scraps could have Quranic verses written on them, and to throw away such holy writings could invite a curse upon their head on Judgment Day. And here's a quote from his book. On the day of judgment, when Muhammad will summon his followers from purgatory to heaven and eternal bliss, the only road to them will be over a red-hot gridiron, which they must walk across with bare feet. A painful ordeal, methinks. Picture to yourself a cock skipping and hopping over hot coals. Now comes the marvel. All the paper they have preserved from being trodden on and insulted will appear unexpectedly, sticking itself under their feet, and be of the greatest service in protecting them from the red-hot iron. These great boon awaits those who save paper from bad treatment. On some occasions, here's Uyghur Busbek speaking again, on some occasions, our guides were most indignant when my servants, for using paper for some very dirty work, and reported it to me as an outrageous offense. I replied that they must not be surprised at such acts on the part of my servants. What could they expect, I added, from people who are accustomed to eat pork? So, as you can see, the place of the Quran obviously has very important treatment within Islam, and there are a number of superstitions that surround its use, much like the use of holy books in many other religions. So what we're going to look at next in the next lecture is to get back into our historical narrative. And now that we've seen the establishment of Islam and the Quran, we'll see what happened following the death of Muhammad and the growth of the caliphate, but also divisions forming within Islam, which led to its split between Sunnism and Shiism. Thanks for listening.